Now, Will Rogers was a humorist who traveled around the United States back in the 20s and 30s. He was born about 1859, and he would make commentary about politics and about various things going on. One of his comments about Alexander Hamilton was that he started the U.S. Treasury with nothing, and that was the closest our country has ever been to being even. So we've got rules and regulations that are set up by the states, by the federal government, by the local governments. Those entities have to survive, they have to exist in order to provide to us the goods and the services that they do for us. They protect us, they control industry, they control crime, they help make things work. So the way that we pay them to do that is through a taxation system. So as you're setting up your business, you want to be aware that there are regulations that apply to you that you may not even know about. Another thing that Will Rogers would say is that the only difference between death and taxes is that death doesn't get worse every time Congress is in session. And then he says, the only thing that the income tax has made more liars out of us than the game of golf. And our country, if you're looking at anything political in our country, you understand that we have come to feel the same way when Congress is in session as we feel when somebody hands the baby a hammer. So, you don't want it close to your glass top table. So that's kind of how we feel about them. They are a necessary evil. We have to deal with them. We have to deal with them. My dad would tell you that the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion is 10 to 20 years. So you don't want to go to jail. The problem with our tax codes and our regulatory environment is that very much like a character in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who is known as the ravenous blood-bladder beast of Trawl. Now, he's a rather large creature that lives on the planet of Trawl, and he likes to eat things. But he is so mind-bogglingly stupid that he thinks that if you can't see him, he can't see you. So your best defense against him is to just put a towel over your head and walk past quickly. This is not how the federal government works. Just because you can't see it and you don't know about it does not mean you're free and clear. Ignorance is no excuse. So here we go. GS asked me to talk to you about choosing business structures for setting up your business. Now, there's no one size fits all. This is, it's not Sam's Wholesale Club where you can buy an extra large sweatshirt and everybody's going to be comfortable in it. You got to kind of know where you're going. So I pulled out a little vignette from Alice in Wonderland. Are you guys familiar with the story of Alice in Wonderland? Okay, so Alice comes to a crossroads and she meets the Cheshire Cat. And she says, "Please, can you tell me which way I should go from here?" And the cat responds to her, "Where are you going?" And Alice says, "Well, I don't know." And the cat says, "Then any road will get you there." She says, "Well, at least I'll end up somewhere." That may not be what you have in mind. So it's very important for you to understand the differences in the various ways you can set up your business, and for whoever's helping you to do that, to understand where it is you think you're heading with that business. Do you want a sole proprietorship? If it's just me working in my office, I'm perfectly happy with a sole proprietorship or a partnership, which I happen to have a partnership with my dad, and then my husband has a sole proprietorship. When my husband dies or he decides to retire, that business just ends. It doesn't have any corporate structure. It has some bookkeeping that's involved in it, but it doesn't have a corporate structure that can be just bought from him. So a sole proprietorship, simple, easy to set up, easy to run with it. You can do your bookkeeping for it. The downside is you've got some tax issues with it. You've got A, no corporate protection, so if you do something stupid and somebody sues you, you don't have a limited liability within a sole proprietorship. But you've got very simplified tax regulations regarding that. Another option you have is to set up a limited liability corporation or a limited liability company. An LLC, for state purposes, is very similar to a corporation, but as far as the federal government is concerned, it's considered a non-entity, or it's a disregarded entity. So your filing for your LLC will involve just a Schedule C on your personal income tax return. It doesn't cost you any corporate income tax. You don't have any federal corporate filing restriction needs with an LLC that is a single member. Now, if you're a single member with your spouse, that's also considered a single member LLC for tax filing purposes. With an LLC or a corporation or a limited partnership, you're going to have some regulations that you have to comply with as far as the state is. You're going to have to do some articles of incorporation. You're going to set up some bylaws. You're going to have to establish that paperwork. So the Secretary of State website, sos.gov, I think I'll give you those in a minute. But you have to set up some extra things in order to set up those entities. A corporation owns stock. So everything that is done inside that corporation is held by the stockholder. And it is more portable, meaning that if I set up a business down on Main Street and I buy a building inside that corporation, I operate from that corporation, I create a balance sheet for it, I have a separate filing with the federal government for that, and I have filing with the state. If I am doing business outside the state of Texas and inside the state of Texas, I have issues that I have to deal with that corporation that I don't have to deal with if I'm operating as a sole proprietor. So it matters to you whether or not you sit down with an accountant ahead of time to figure out where you need to be. You need a good attorney, you need a good accountant to help you navigate that roadmap, because as I said, if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to take you down. Another option, if you set up a corporation and you do a small business corporation election, which is called an S-Corp, then your taxation will flow through to you on a K-1, which is a filing form. You have to file a separate tax return for that corporation, but it distributes to you all of the income from that corporation annually. You pay for it on your personal tax return, not a separate corporate taxation. So if I have a corporation that I own, that corporation has to pay me payroll, has to pay me a salary, and I'm subject to payroll tax that I don't have in my sole proprietorship or my partnership. But that corporation has a separate tax rate as well. So if a corporation has profits in it, you're going to pay tax on the profit in the corporation before you distribute those dividends to yourself, and you distribute the dividends, and then you pay tax on that at a personal level. So the corporate structure can be complicated. It depends where you're going. What do you need to do with that corporate structure? So it's hard for me to give you a generic discussion of how that's set up or the ramifications of that without looking at your personal tax picture. It would be like me diagnosing a chest strep throat when really you just had a cough. So you probably don't want me to send you antibiotics when you didn't need them. Let me think what else we need to talk about. How am I doing for time? Another thing you want to consider is that recent regulations called FATCA, which are has to do with foreign account transactions and activity. You're going to have, if you live in the United States or you are present in the United States for a regulatory period of time, you have to report those foreign assets and pay tax on the income for those foreign assets as well. So it's a very complicated tax situation, and it's not getting easier. I'm trying to think what else I need to tell you guys. Does everybody get kind of what a partnership is or a limited liability company is? You get that? Okay. So some of the things that you would discuss at an accountant's office would be, it's important if you're thinking about hiring an employee, it's very important to sit down with your accountant or your CPA and discuss that. You want to talk about how often the filings are needed. You want to know before you get to the backside of not filing payroll taxes that there's a 100% penalty for not having paid in those payroll taxes. So the government recently has taken to just, if it decides that maybe you should have paid payroll and you didn't file a payroll tax report, they'll just file one for you, and then they'll send you a demand notice that you pay. And once you get those demand notices, if you don't respond to those, then they will just seize your assets. So you really, it's ugly. It is ugly. So, I looked at one recently. A lady came in, and she and her husband, they were in their 80s. They'd owned this business for years. It was a small business corporation. It was an S Corp. The taxes flowed through to them. Their son was doing some machining work for them. And they had a nice business going. They were selling probably $1 million a year worth of goods and services. The son's daughter, that he did not raise, suddenly came back into the family, and she said, "Oh, Dad, I'll do the bookkeeping for you. I don't mind doing that. I'm really good at that. I can do the bookkeeping." So they handed it over to her, and while she was at it, she said, "Dad, if you'll just let me go ahead and pay your bills too, then that'll be, I'll take care of that. You won't have to worry about any of that." Well, the little darling got off with $250,000 from her parents and her grandparents before they figured it out and shut her down. And her grandparents, and then she disappeared from the picture, obviously, wouldn't you? So she's gone now. They worked to repay the $160,000 worth of payroll taxes that she had not paid in for them, and she'd been shredding the letters and hiding things from them. So it put the grandfather in the grave. He did not survive that loss and that pain. It's very important for you to have somebody that you trust, but it's also important for you to double check and make sure that they're following through with what you're supposed to do. Because the reality is, if I'm the one who should have known that those payroll taxes weren't being paid, I'm in trouble. I'm the one whose head is on the chopping block. You want to be very, very careful to not get in that problem. Now, it's important to have an advocate who kind of understands what the rules are, because Texas Workforce Commission would like to come in and say to you, "Oh, Mrs. Forrester, you have a lovely little LLC here, and you're the only person who works for you, but we think that you should pay unemployment tax on what you pay to yourself, because it's an LLC, and that's a limited liability company, and you should be paying yourself a salary from your self-employment." Well, when I talked to a TWC officer recently, I said, "Okay, so explain this to me. If I shut my business down, and I was the only person who worked for the business, and I shut it down, and I fire myself, and I come file for unemployment with you, are you going to pay me?" His response was no. And so I won that one. We didn't have to report payroll taxes on my sole proprietor who was operating as an LLC. So you want somebody who can advocate for you. Another little issue that I have is I've got a good friend who decided she could do it on TurboTax. It's okay. And her husband works, you know, she gets a paycheck, he gets a paycheck. They don't own a business. But as I'm sorry, I didn't say TurboTax, any sort of online tax program that asks you all these wonderful questions says, you know, oh, do you drive a car for your business? And you say, oh yes, I do. I drive a car for my business. Well, then you're entitled to these deductions, okay? So we created for her a Schedule C, which is self-employment income, and it created about a $15,000 deduction for her on a Schedule C. And all that was on that Schedule C was the vehicle expense. Well, that's something that IRS, you know, that's a flag. It pops up and they go, okay, this guy's claiming self-employment deductions, but he's got zero self-employment income. So we think we're going to audit that. So it took me about 2 years of fighting back and forth with them to move those deductions to a non-employee or an employee business expense and the other. I ended up saving them about, I'm going to say about $7,500 in tax after I got hold of it and moved the things where they were supposed to go on the tax return. So, you know, is he my friend now? Yes. So 2 years down the track, you know, he brings my stuff, he brings his stuff to me, file my tax return. So last year, I didn't hear from him. You know, it's April the 12th. I get this phone call from him and he says, I really thought I could do this myself, but I can't. And so he said, so what the rule is I need to pay you about $400 a year to just take care of me so that I don't have to pay an extra $7,000 a year in income tax. Well, yeah, because he didn't know what the tax return was supposed to look like when he got done. So, you know, do I always save somebody money? Not necessarily, but I can save you grief on the backside. Because the business that I work in with my dad, he's been a CPA since 1963. He's been in Grand Prairie, Texas since 1964. We have never had a material change on an audit, and we haven't had any clients in jail, and we think that's a good thing. You know, it's a good thing. Let me think what else I need to tell you guys. Other things that you need to consider if you are setting up a business that is actually profitable. You have options to do some self-funding for some IRAs, for some retirement plans. Those are things that your accountant, your CPA, and your financial advisor can work with you on that will help you. Because, you know, the reality is what you keep for you is as much or more important than what you made. Because if you're giving it all to the government, it's just ugly. So, you know, I would love to talk to you individually if you need something. If you have a situation you want to talk about, be happy to do that. I don't know where else you want me to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So please hold your questions. We'll have a Q&A panel session in the end. Now I'd like to invite the T Vice President, Mr. Prem, to come up on the stage and tell us a little bit about tea.